Yeah, so what makes CloudStack robust is a number of things. First of all, it was designed around large scale and has been installed at incredible scale, tens of thousands of physical nodes, and that type of real world experience doing it at scale has made CloudStack very robust. That also makes some assumptions around assuming that things will fail, and those types of design assumptions where you're not trying to avoid failure but rather you're assuming that failure will happen has also contributed to make that something that that's incredibly robust and incredibly ready for real use. And that's been, I think that those types of design decisions have been used throughout CloudStack and have made that a very solid platform to build on. Well, when you talk about user interfaces, CloudStack has what most people will agree is the most beautiful user interface. And I think that's somewhat deceptive. And the reason I think it's deceptive is that while it's beautiful to look at and people really like it, people who are doing real work with CloudStack at any scale aren't using the CloudStack user interface. They're interacting with the API instead, and they may use other tools to interact with that API. I think it's beautiful. I think it allows users to quickly get a sense of what's going on. But I think it's also something that quickly fades from memory as people start using it because they realize how powerful and useful the API actually is. Well, so if you go back and look at the history of open source, typically open source has always been playing catch up. When Linux was first created, Linus was trying to create an alternative to Minix, which was a proprietary Unix operating system. And when commercial Linux really came of age, it was competing with proprietary Unices like Solaris and HPUX. And so open source has always typically been trying to play catch up. And cloud computing is an area where that has changed. Instead of trying to catch up with something, all of the innovation is happening in open source. All of the serious players in cloud computing, it's at least infrastructure as a service, but also now bleeding into platform as a service, are open source. You'll even see proprietary vendors who have a long history of proprietary software like VMware. They realize that cloud computing is open source, and you'll see them doing things like Cloud Foundry, which is a completely open source project. So not only is it important, I think it's foundational to cloud computing. I don't think that you will see the success of a proprietary cloud platform because the standard has definitely become that everything within cloud computing is commodity and is open source. If you look at the largest clouds out there, if you look at Amazon, Amazon, while not itself open source, is certainly built on that foundation of open source. And so I don't think that you'll see anywhere where open source is not pervasive in cloud computing. And so I think it's an assumption. I think when you talk about cloud computing, you're really talking about open source cloud computing, unless it's some very niche market. So individual users are very important, and for any open source project, users typically are the beginning of the pipeline for people who end up becoming contributors to CloudStack. So there's clearly a curve there. People who are users are certainly necessary. That's one of the reasons we write software. But people who are using it and testing it, finding finding bugs and reporting those bugs so that we know about them. In many ways, cloud platforms are incredibly complex systems, and because they're so complex, that makes testing every possible use case becomes more and more difficult. And so users who are actually using it in the real world are the best people to find bugs. And so we love the people that set up a test instance and test upgrades or test new features to see, are they going to work for their use case, and provide that both the feedback loop and the valuable contribution in terms of telling us about bugs, maybe even proposing fixes and things of that nature. In many ways, it's absolutely vital to the ongoing health of CloudStack. So as we look to the future of cloud computing, I think we're starting to see each one of these technologies begins with typically greenfield adoption. I think we're starting to see the point where people really desperately want some of the promises and some of the efficiencies that cloud computing drives. I think CloudStack as a project is going to be one of the leaders there, simply because it's some of the most featureful and robust platforms out there. And I think that as the infrastructure as a service realm continues to mature, that CloudStack's going to continue leading that. And we'll see. I think we'll see things that are currently features that only exist in things like CloudStack become kind of the de facto standards, the expectations that are necessary. It wasn't too long ago till that CloudStack was the only infrastructure as a service platform that had high availability, and now we're starting to see that become a standard. So in many ways, I see CloudStack leading the standard setting that we'll see across the infrastructure as a service market. I do think that CloudStack's also setting the standard pretty high with our idea behind governance. And I think that you'll start to see folks trying to achieve that same level of meritocracy and community over code that CloudStack at the Apache Software Foundation aspires to. And I think it will be an interesting next year or two as we see things continuing to evolve. So some of my most interesting deployments, I don't think I could tell where they were from. There's a major movie studio that they were using CloudStack. They were using it to transcode video, and so they had this entire on-demand provisioning system that would detect how much work there was to do and provision instances, have them run the work, and then shut them down. And I thought that was terribly fascinating. What I found more fascinating is what they did during lunch, where they would spin up 50 or 60 game servers and play some online game that they would basically host in their company, and they would be playing that company-wide on instances that they would provision over lunch, and then as soon as lunch was over, they would destroy all the instances and go back to doing real work. That has been one of my more enjoyable tales to recount of interesting deployments. So I'm a weird user. I'm a recovering sysadmin. And that makes my answers, I think, a little strange. I would have to say, though, that from my perspective, my favorite feature is some of the networking capabilities, the networking as a service, where I can essentially provision services and make those available to end users, and then end users can go and say, I need a load balancer, I need to configure a firewall, which was something that as a traditional operations or sysadmin person, I would never have allowed users to get passwords to set. The fact that that's all abstracted away and people can do really complex networking stuff and effectively not even have to ask for permission is pretty awesome and empowering. So CloudStack as an open source project, I think you can expect a lot of things. We're seeing lots of people wanting to start scratching their itches, and so I think you're going to see a lot more user-oriented development. And by user-oriented, I don't mean to say that it hasn't been focused on users heretofore, but I think that that instead of now a limited pool of folks working on it, we can essentially have anyone come in and start working on a feature that they care about. So I think that that means that the most passionate users will become contributors, and that they will, in the process, greatly broaden the horizon for CloudStack. I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of the processes going through iterations and becoming more efficient from handling, and I think that will end up making CloudStack even more stable and more robust, because we'll be iterating faster through tests, we'll be iterating faster through changes, and I think everyone in the end will benefit from that.